This is episode 15 with Dr. Kate Lund. Hi, my name is Leon Gabrielian, and this is the Thriving Life Club, the podcast for those who want to thrive in every area of life. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the club. Let's begin. Welcome back to the club, champion. Today, our amazing guest is Dr. Kate Lund. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and performance coach with more than 15 years of experience. Dr. Lund uses a strength-based approach in working with athletes and teams to improve their mental game in sports, school, and life, while helping them to reach their full potential. Dr. Lund has a special interest in working with athletes recovering from injury, helping them cope and maintain their mental edge. She played collegiate tennis and these days is an avid golfer and tennis swimmer. Her latest book is called Bounce: Help Your Child Build Resilience and Thrive in School, Sports, and Life. Welcome to the club, Dr. Lund. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm great. I really appreciate being here.
This is exciting. Let's first talk about your book. The title is captivating. What brought you to write the book and what is it about?
Bounce is really a book focused on helping parents, teachers, coaches to build resilience in their own children or those that they're working with. And we outline 7 pillars of the resilient child in the book, and we go through each one of them. The book is written really through a human lens. So we use kind of real life stories to illustrate each of the points. The research is implicit in the book, but we really don't go into it in depth in the actual book. We are more illustrating the points through human stories. And that is really the big idea with the book. I've had a long-term interest in this idea of resilience from the time that I was a young child. I grew up with a complicated medical condition called hydrocephalus, which caused me to miss a lot of school, set me apart from my peers in various ways. And I really had to be resilient from an early point in order to keep up with, my life and those around me. And had a really strong, I was very fortunate support system to help me do that. And then, of course, I went on to become a psychologist, and resilience is a big piece of the work that I do as a psychologist. Obviously, help people build resilience, move through and beyond challenge, develop a new sense of normal when the need is arising. And then finally, the book was spurred on by my own children and watching them sort of go through the trials and tribulations of life in elementary school. And those are really the three components that came together to push me into writing this book and make it such a important project, both personally and professionally.
You have 2 boys, right? As far as I know.
I do, yes. I have 10-year-old twins, and watching them day to day teach me, teach my husband, they teach us all a lot about this idea of resilience, facing challenges in school, facing challenges in sports, finding ways to bounce back from those challenges, circumvent those challenges, and still move forward. So yeah, wonderful teachers. The boys are wonderful teachers.
Definitely, I can imagine. The word resilience is also very fascinating, and I've been also a fan of the resilience and learning everything I could since my college years. Resilience and coping. The resilience is very important to master, but you don't hear it on a daily basis on the media or, out there. It's not a sexy thing to talk about or teach. Would you agree?
Yes. I think I would agree. It's becoming a bit more mainstream in recent years, but I hear what you're saying. And it's not sort of the first kind of go-to that folks think of when they think about moving, through and beyond challenge. But that's really, what we're saying when we talk about resilience. It's this ability to move through and beyond challenge, bounce back when something goes wrong, when you hit an obstacle, and so many important lessons in this idea of resilience for all of us, really. And teaching our children early and helping them to build a robust toolbox and develop the skills of resilience early is such an important and great thing.
Why is it really important to teach our kids to be resilient, develop resilience long term?
It's important because, we think about it. If a child, hits an obstacle and gets knocked down, which is inevitable, we're all going to face challenge. Challenge is just an inevitable part of the human experience. And having that ability to get back up when we face a challenge, to move through and beyond that challenge is vital if we're going to move in the direction of our true potential. If we're going to be able to realize our potential in all domains, we absolutely positively need to be able to get back up when we get knocked down and maybe try a different angle, but we definitely need to be able to move forward. And so that's really, in a nutshell, why it's so important.
And raising two boys, what are some of the things that you as a parent had to deal with or handle? Most common problems or issues that you face as a parent?
Yeah, goodness, there's so many. However, I think the primary issues that we face in elementary school and beyond, middle school, high school, but really these issues start to heat up in elementary school are the social issues. The social issues that emerge as kids are trying to really figure out who they are, what they sort of want to be, so to speak, in a sort of rudimentary way, because that's a process that evolves over a long span of time. But, the kids trying to communicate with each other and maybe having different styles, and then, bullying emerging as a primary issue. And that can be true bullying, or it can be sort of misunderstood bullying in terms of, boys trying to communicate, but having very different styles. So, the sensitive child feels like they're being shut down or put down, whereas, the child with perhaps a more dominant style has no idea that they're doing that, or maybe they do, so it's really, there are a lot of social issues that become come very much to the forefront that need to be untangled, understood. And kids really need to be resilient in order to manage these issues as they come up, because the social domain is so powerful for kids, particularly during the elementary, middle, high school years. And so I would say that for us in the past several years has been primary.
Absolutely. I can definitely relate to the bullying experience. I've had some experience with bullies. After I switched school, there was some instances of bullying, and then I had to figure it out myself, kind of handle it myself. And it was a great lesson, a life lesson. And at the end, I became friends with some of the bullies. I became to understand their language, so to speak. Did you have that sort of experience?
Yeah. I've observed that experience with my boys, and I had that same experience when I was a child. As a result of my medical challenges that I had early on, I was sort of set apart, and there was a lot of time in the hospital. Came back from the hospital, came back to school. Maybe I had a strange haircut from the surgery, or I, looked different or funny. And so kids would pick on me and make fun of me, and it was very, very hard. But there were instances where over time, kids would kind of come to see my situation a little bit differently, would sort of, develop a little bit more compassion. And then I could kind of see where they were coming from a little bit more fully, and we were able to kind of join. So I had that same kind of experience where, I maybe felt bullied and belittled at the outset, but then, things kind of turned around when there was, a greater degree and sense of understanding between me and these other folks. And I'm seeing that a little bit, the same situation with my boys. We haven't quite gotten yet to the point of mutual understanding with them and the kids that are a little bit rough with one of my kids. that hasn't quite happened yet, but we've talked a lot about sort of the issues, the communication styles, and how the differences can really cause friction. But what I will say is that teaching all kids the skills necessary to develop a strong social emotional foundation, which really helps them to navigate friendships, navigate social pressures, is absolutely imperative. And so that's sort of the ability to be self-aware, to have compassion for kids who are different than themselves. Understanding and embracing individual difference is really, really important when we're talking about these social issues. And I'm a strong, strong proponent of getting these kinds of social emotional curriculums embedded in our schools so that kids are being exposed to these messages and learning these skills and tools early. So, so important for navigating the social issues.
I can't agree with you more. A classroom, for example, is a small model of the outside world. And the way the kids interact in the classroom, in a closed environment, is going to teach them or also predict how they're going to act outside in the world. Would you agree that a classroom is kind of training ground? And in some instances, I would say bullying is useful. It's pushing the kid towards finding ways to communicate better or more effectively with their peers so that they're ready for the outside world. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's very true. It's in many ways, the classroom, school in general, recess, the playground, it's sort of a microcosm of the real world, right? That kids are going to have to be able to manage and cope within when they move into that space. So absolutely, this idea of helping kids to develop the skills to navigate these challenges, to communicate with each other, to resolve differences is so, so important. And so we really need to have, teachers who are equipped to help in these ways instead of just looking the other way when there's a conflict or an issue. Really sort of, help to bring the kids where that issue is happening together to talk about it from a variety of different angles, help them to develop and integrate the skills. Because ultimately, yeah, kids need to learn to navigate these things so that they are prepared later on to navigate in the real world as adults. And, all of these issues really, and the pillars that we talk about in Bounce apply across the lifespan. It's just that we're talking about them from the perspective of the elementary school child in the book, but all of the principles that we're outlining and discussing apply to all of us across the lifespan.
Exactly. And there are 7 pillars. Let's get specific. We talked about what the classroom could be like, the school can do, what the teachers could do. Let's get specific and tell our listener, if they're a parent now, and if they're not yet, in the future, when they become a parent, what can they do on their part when they talk to their kids? How can they prepare, if it's possible, of course, their children mentally, emotionally, to cope better and to be more resilient? How can they assist the children?
Right. Great question. And, so one thing that we really want to help parents to do is help their kids to get into a place where they can tolerate frustration, manage their emotions. And so to train parents, to train teachers in some of the basic mindfulness techniques that will help children to do that, manage their emotion and tolerate their frustration. Really, really important. But even more important is just this notion of connecting with their child, understanding what their children's experiences are, how they're feeling, and really encouraging their children to engage in a conversation with them about those things, not being afraid to share their own experiences when relevant, when appropriate, about how it was for them as a kid, how things may have changed, but what some useful strategies may have been. So it's really this idea of talking with your child, connecting with them on a human level. And the same thing can happen inside the classroom in many ways. If teachers can take the time to get to know kids as individuals, sort of try to understand the nuances of what makes them tick, what's sort of driving them forward towards their potential, that is such a beneficial and important thing.
Let's go through the pillars really quick. First pillar is called tolerating frustration and managing emotions.
If one becomes overly frustrated about a certain situation, like maybe we're thinking about a child in math class and they had prepared for this test that they're about to take the night before, had all of the problems, the ways to do the problems down in their head, but now all of a sudden they're in the test, they're in the classroom, and their mind goes blank and there's no way to, make this happen. They're just not getting it. And, that child will most likely become frustrated. When that happens, emotions tend to run out of control. And when that happens, a child will most likely shut down. So what we want to do is we want to help that child to self-regulate those emotions, to bring themselves back into the present moment such that they can really sort of calm down and enter a state of flow, if you will. And when that happens, we know, based on the research and based on experience, that information and, things that we knew just the night before, for example, become much more accessible. And so if we can help our children to do that, we're setting them up to be much more resilient to, some of the very common stressors that emerge in the classroom every day or in any domain of their life. And we can help parents to learn the skills to teach their kids to become more mindful in the moment, to self-regulate those emotions. That can all be done with a little bit of coaching, psychoeducation, that sort of thing. So it's a very real tool that can be used by both parents, teachers, and kids. Once they understand what it feels like to be in that zone, they can call that feeling up anytime and put it into play for themselves.
Pillar 2 is called navigating friendships and social pressures. What is important to know about that?
That is what we were talking about a little bit ago in relation to the reality of the social pressures that kids are facing these days, right? And so the ability to navigate friendships and social pressures in an effective way that's sort of positive and forward moving is so, so important. And we do this by really helping kids to develop that strong social emotional foundation that we also mentioned earlier, a sense of self-awareness, the ability to accept and embrace individual differences with curiosity and empathy as opposed to ridicule and put down. The ability to stand up for themselves when friendships go off track, but also at the same time, the ability to be a true friend and to work hard to understand where their peers are coming from and how they might reach consensus or meet in the middle. And it's a process. It takes time to do this. But again, lots of curriculums out there to make this happen, and such an important place to focus for parents and teachers and coaches and all of us, really.
Yeah, it's a great skill to have for lifetime.
Yes.
The third pillar is about sustaining focus and attention. What do you mean by that?
Really what we're talking about there kind of goes back as well to the mindfulness techniques can help with this ability to sustain focus and attention. But beyond that, we're really talking about goal setting and helping kids to kind of think about what their goals are. What is their desired direction? Where do their passions lie? Where are their aptitudes? Where do those things intersect? And really helping kids to get into the habit or get into a space where they're able to set a larger goal, a longer term goal, but then to set smaller, more immediate goals on the way to that larger goal and to remain focused and attentive to those smaller goals so they reach the larger goal in time. And again, it's, a process which has to evolve over time, but helping kids early to develop these skills of goal setting and striving for meeting goals, smaller goals on the way to the larger goals is such an important skill and will be so helpful later on and helpful when they encounter a challenge. So that's really what we're talking about there.
Do you have an example in mind that's going to help the listener to solidify it?
Sure, absolutely. I can think of many examples. I'll just pull one out. Say a child is really thinking that they want to join the band next year in fourth grade, and they're in third grade now. But they know that in order to join the band, they have to have a rudimentary sense of how to read music. And the band teacher is available to help kids get to that point, the younger kids who aren't yet quite in the band. And helping the child to figure out, okay, so I want to be in the band next year. But I need to have a beginning sense of how to read music. Miss Curry will help me with that. But what do I need to do to make that happen? I need to go talk to her. I need to then take what she says, what she teaches me, and I need to work on that for 5 or 10 minutes a day until I start to really get it. At which point I can actually pick up an instrument and start kind of playing around with it, familiarizing myself with it such that I'm prepared to be a full-fledged member of the band at the beginning of fourth grade. So that would be one such example when we're thinking about music. And so many examples to pull from. It could be in sports. It could be a child who wants to learn to play tennis, and that's going to take steps. We're not going to go from picking up a racket to playing in tournaments. But if that child really discovers a passion for tennis, they need to follow the direction of their coaches. They need to take the steps in practice which are going to get them to their next goal, which might be, having a rally of 6 consecutive balls in a row, at which point they can join the pre-tennis team, at which point they can start playing matches. Once they're able to play matches at a certain level, they can move on to the advanced team, and then it goes on from there. So it's really the ability to integrate the steps that are necessary to move forward in sort of a goal-directed way. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And what would you say is the role of the parent? Would you say it's just to support them in, first of all, noticing what the kid is passionate about, and then second, supporting them in any way possible?
Exactly. That's really, really important. And it's a really important point that you bring up, because oftentimes parents, because they were a tennis player or because they were a baseball player, they want their kids to do the same thing. And that's not a great idea, because what if their passions or their aptitudes lie in different areas? So early on, it's important to give kids exposure to many different things. And in that way, hopefully they'll gravitate towards their passions, their aptitudes will become clear. And then once that happens, sort of passion and aptitude can be fostered by parental support, by the child's desire to keep going in a certain area or domain, whether it be sports or art or music or what have you. So yeah, parents definitely play a huge role, and parental support is so, so important in helping kids move forward.
I think it also provides emotional foundation and emotional security in the child's, psyche that is going to help to build a better character, a stronger character, is going to help them thrive through life.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's right. Sort of building a strong character, building a groundedness, a feeling of security. And really, it helps to build the child's belief in themselves, their belief that no matter what kind of obstacle they might hit, it's still possible to reach their goals. It's still possible to move forward. So, doing that in a balanced way is really, really important because we still want parents, coaches, teachers to be able to provide constructive criticism to kids. We want the children to be able to accept that and, maybe shift their behavior or shift their direction as a result. So we want to have that balance there. It can't all be positive, you're the best, this, that, and the other, but a healthy amount of support is very, very important. And a belief in the child from the parent, from the teacher is so, so important.
The words balance and healthy amount are very important because in the worst case, there are some parents who put too much pressure on the child to perform in any area. And then those kids end up being depressed. They sometimes end their life, all kinds of horrible things. So it's very important to keep it balanced in a healthy manner.
Exactly. That is such a good point because, it can go too far. This idea of supporting our children can really go too far. It can go into the domain that you just mentioned of, overpressuring them and making them feel like they need to be the best. They need to win at all costs. And that's not the point. What we want to have happen is parents to support their children in whatever it is they're doing, whether it be sports, music, academics, without pressuring them to succeed at all costs, to be someone who they're not, that kind of thing.
Right.
But I just want to make one more point, though, about the whole idea of support from parents and teachers. Really, really vital for kids who, might struggle, might have a challenge in some way. I'm thinking specifically about the classroom, about kids with learning disabilities who are perhaps in the mainstream school. And, certain teachers are absolutely wonderful and they're able to look at that child who has learning differences, from a different angle and help to foster their strengths and help move them forward from that alternative or different angle. But there are also instances where teachers get stuck with, student A and student B, they must be in the box. And if they're not in the box, then there's something wrong with them. And they'll oftentimes communicate that message to the child. And that can be really, really hard and damaging for the child. So we want the teachers, as well as the parents to really take on that healthy balance perspective and realize that not all kids are coming from the same place, the same direction.
Do you have an example?
Well, I do actually. One of my kids recently had an experience. He actually has dyslexia and he is reading at grade level now, and it's a great thing. And we're excited about it. And he's learning to advocate for himself. And there was a substitute teacher involved one day, and he had a reading assignment, and he went to ask for clarity on a question that he had to answer. He didn't quite understand the question the way it was worded, so he asked for clarity. He was proud because he was advocating for himself. And the response he got from this substitute teacher was basically, well, your reading skills aren't good enough, clearly. So I guess you're going to have to go work a little harder to figure that out. And that kind of a thing happens, unfortunately, in our schools. I'm hoping it doesn't happen frequently, but it happened in this case. And it's something that isn't helpful for kids who are coming at learning from a different angle as a result of, their challenges. But again, a good learning opportunity for him because we were able to have the discussion of, well, not everybody understands the different angles. And this is an opportunity for you to understand yourself better and come out on the other side of this experience even stronger.
In life, there's going to be so many rude people or maybe people who won't understand us. Or maybe we might think they don't understand us, but they might have a different perspective. So there might be all kinds of misunderstandings the child should be ready to face, even though they might be painful at first, but they'll eventually learn how to kind of absorb it and work with it and handle it, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so we really want to be able to talk with our kids about these difficult and challenging situations that they face in life. I mean, in school early on here, as sort of a microcosm of what they can expect later on in life. Because as I mentioned before, we're all going to experience challenges in one form or another, because challenges is impossible to escape. It's inevitable. And, we don't want to negate those challenges. What we want to do is acknowledge the reality and help our kids to develop robust toolboxes for managing those challenges and moving through and beyond them.
Dr. Lund, what would you say in this area? What kind of mistakes parents make? Mothers, I would assume, are better at talking to kids, especially in situations that are very important and might be life changing. And the dads are not as equipped, I would say. What are some of the mistakes that parents make when communicating with their children in the important situations like this?
Right. Yeah. That's a great question. And so either sort of not communicating, sort of assuming that the issues will work themselves out, without really trying to connect around them. So that's kind of one thing that can happen, sort of sweeping things under the rug, hoping they'll just work themselves out when really there's a larger issue festering. So that's one thing. And then there are, certain parenting styles which will want to subdue any sort of emotional expression, particularly when it comes to boys. And that can be quite damaging. We want all of our kids to really be able to express their feelings, learn how to express their sort of emotional state, if you will. It's a part of managing emotions and tolerating frustration, actually. And especially important when it comes to boys who are expected, just sort of traditionally to be a bit more stoic, a bit more contained about how they're feeling. And when a boy is more sensitive than, say, the typical boy, sometimes parents will have a hard time with that and try to stifle him more, when really the opposite is so important. Helping him to really identify those feelings, understand them, integrate them into who he is and how he behaves in the world and interacts with people is so, so important. Such a part of the process of forming an identity and forming that global sense of self-awareness, which is such an important piece of that social emotional foundation we were talking about before.
At one point, I wanted to become a doctor. So I was pre-med. I took all the courses required, and I was going towards becoming a doctor. And I wanted to become specifically a pediatrician. I wanted to work and help children, because children are the future. In order to create a better future, I think it's very important to raise better kids. Keeping that in mind, I think most of the problems in the world start in the kindergarten. Keeping in mind that children are the future, and the better we raise our children, the more resilient they are, the more they're able to cope with things, the more ready they are for the world. How can parents develop courage in children? And tell me about the next pillar, which is the fourth pillar, called developing courage. What do you mean by courage? Is it the ability to jump into a fight? I think that's not what you mean in this chapter. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, not what I mean at all. So when I'm talking about courage, courage is important for so many reasons. And what we're talking about here is sort of, helping a child develop the courage to try to do something that might seem scary or out of reach at first, but helping them to take that first step forward. And then if they don't succeed the first time around, to try again, and then maybe even try again from a different angle. And, in that process, a child starts to develop this rudimentary sense of courage by overcoming fear, by trying new things, pushing their limits, and doing this all while backed by encouragement and support from parents, teachers, coaches is so, so important. And so we also want, kids to start developing and building on this sense of courage, because it gives them a sense of what's possible. It gives them a sense of not only what's possible, but what do they have to do? What do they have to overcome to get to that thing that's possible? And it goes back as well to the earlier pillars, building skills in emotional awareness, self-regulation, along with stress tolerance, for example, helps children to find the courage that they need to try and then try again when things don't go as planned. I'm thinking about a young baseball player that I know who was absolutely petrified when they made the transition from the pitching machine to kid pitch, and petrified of getting hurt and petrified of getting hit by that ball. And then, lo and behold, perhaps because there was so much fear going on, the young boy did get hit. And then it became a process of really helping him to develop the courage to get back into that batter's box, to try again when this situation became really untenable to him. I mean, he was so afraid. He was shaking when he was up to bat because he had been hit, because he had been hurt, and that was his greatest fear. So really helping him to get back into the batter's box using some mindfulness-based techniques, some emotional self-regulation techniques, helped him to get back into the batter's box. Then once he was in there, couple rounds, couple innings, and, started to become less fearful, started to figure out like, okay, I think I can do this. And in that process, developed more courage, became more courageous in this situation where he had been so, so afraid. And really helping kids in all areas of their life to do the same type of thing, encourage them to take risks, encourage them to move beyond their comfort zone, encourage them to do these things is going to help, doing these things is going to help them to, address and get over this fear of failure. So these are all of the reasons why we want to help our kids become courageous, help them build on that courage, so that they can ultimately live courageous lives.
Absolutely. And when we say courage, what I hear, it automatically reminds me of the Paul Tillich's book called The Courage to Be. That's what I visualize, basically.
Yes. So the courage to be themselves, the courage to get out there and try, the courage to do these things, even if there's fear, even if it seems out of reach, even if it seems scary.
Right, right. Dr. Lund, on a much simpler example, would you agree it's really also important to help the children develop this courage so that they're able to say something? For example, you've probably seen a video or two of people fighting or some kind of conflict. And then around them, there is this crowd of other people with their phones recording those people fighting. Instead of pulling them apart and doing something about the fight, they're recording and they're not doing anything to resolve the issue and help people resolve their conflict. They're just observing. So this notion, the sense of raising kids to be just another brick in the wall, or raising kids to be valuable parts and contributors of the society, but at the same time being individual and unique, and in situations like that, having the courage to do something if they can, to actually, if they pass by a soda can on the floor, actually pick it up. Or if the air conditioning in the room is set too cold and everyone is complaining. You're in the room with other people and everyone is complaining to themselves and doing nothing, having the courage to actually go and do something, either do something to the air conditioning or say something. What do you think about that?
Yes, I think that's a great point. And yeah, definitely embedded in the messages about courage in balance and how we're thinking about it. Definitely the courage to stand up for, one's beliefs, to take that step that maybe nobody else is taking, maybe on a social level or, just if it's as simple as picking up the soda can that nobody else is picking up, taking that step to act, having the courage to act in a way that is aligned with your beliefs and your values. And, a really important lesson for kids to learn because it doesn't always happen automatically, right? Even if children might be disturbed by watching a friend be bullied or what have you, they might stand by for whatever reason. There's so many reasons and not say or do anything. And then there might be that child who does stand up for the friend and gets in trouble as a result because their actions are misunderstood or they're construed all of a sudden as a bully just because they're trying to defend a friend or a sibling that they see getting hurt. So absolutely, that's a big piece of courage and what we're trying to instill and build within our children for sure.
Definitely, definitely. An example came to mind. I grew up in Russia, and there was this situation that happened during a break between classes. I observed a kid from third grade with glasses, and he was playing. And this guy from outside of school, he wasn't even a part of our school. He was probably 18, 19, or 20, came and grabbed his glasses and started playing and teasing him. So at that moment, I didn't have control of my emotions or feelings. I immediately ran towards him and kind of jumped on top of him. Even though he was much taller, I was probably 13, 14 years old. I didn't think about, our difference in age or what he might do. I immediately jumped on him and kind of hang on him on his neck and tried to do something. And then my friends pulled us apart. But that guy was frightened. He was scared, even though there was a difference between our age. In those kind of cases, I think it's important to teach our kids to do something because that's just a small example in the classroom. As we mentioned before, the classroom is a microcosm of the macrocosm, which is the world that we live in. And things like that, for example, could be superimposed on countries. So if one country starts bullying another country and other countries are not doing anything, do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. That's a great point. And so really helping kids to identify when things are going off track, particularly related to their own belief systems and their values. And, hopefully strong ones have been embedded, in them and in the way they're looking at the world around them. And that also goes back to this idea of, the strong social emotional foundation, being able to respect and support individual differences and, not tear people down, but rather support people and not being, afraid to do those things when perhaps it isn't the mainstream way of being or the most popular action in the moment, but still having the courage to step forward and support or help the person who needs that help in the moment. And also not being afraid to, step up and say something when something seems amiss at school, for example. If they see behavior by another student that seems dangerous or somehow out of the ordinary, instead of rationalizing it away, having the courage to come forward and bring that potential problem to the attention of somebody in charge. That would be a very important example of another way that we can view courage and help our children to develop such courage.
What would you recommend? How can parents develop the sense of ownership in their children? I'm talking about a sense of ownership of their school, their classroom, the world around them, the environment around them, so that the children, for example, are not littering, they care about their environment. How can parents develop that sense in children from very young?
Right. It's a great point. And, really what we can do from a very early point with our kids is we can model this sort of responsible, engaged behavior. And then as a child, gets a little bit older and they're ready for discussion, we can, talk about the ways in which we can take personal responsibility for our own behaviors and our actions. And we can reinforce the reasons why that's so important. And then we can reinforce as well the whole idea behind personal responsibility and engagement by modeling it ourselves. So it's really a combination of modeling and discussion by parents, by teachers, by the whole community in which the child is involved, which can help them to, develop a strong sense of ownership of their behavior and their actions and, really encourage this sense of personal responsibility because really that's a huge piece of resilience as well. This ability to take ownership, to be personally responsible for behaviors, for actions, as opposed to externalizing the reasons for why things went wrong or what have you. Really taking that responsibility is so, so important.
You know what's funny? The listener of this podcast is most likely is already doing those things and they're aware of those things and that's how they raise their children.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on how our listener can deal with other parents who are not aware of these things and they're not doing these things? They're not developing the sense of personal responsibility in their children, the sense of ownership in their children.
Right. And that is a very hard question. And it's one that we, talk about here in the house quite often. And, the reality is, the unfortunate reality is we can't really change the behavior of other people. We can't really change their attitudes. We can really just focus on building on our own strengths, really behaving in the ways that we believe are right, that we believe will lead to this idea of, responsibility, engagement. I mean, of course, we can have rational adult discussions with other parents, suggesting certain things or pointing out things that we notice perhaps. But, when it comes down to it, and we can model, for example, through our own behavior as adults. But sadly, when it comes down to it, we can't change the behavior, the belief systems of other people. I wish we could sometimes, I wish we could when I see parents bullying other parents or parents bullying their kids or, what have you. And then that impacts the behavior of the child who's being bullied by their parent. It's a very challenging situation, vicious cycle, really. So that doesn't really answer your question, but those are my thoughts on that issue at this point.
And I'm sure you had to deal with some sort of fighting between kids. What do you think about how to deal with it? Because I think fights are, especially for boys, are important, the way they deal with other boys. What are your thoughts on how parents can react or handle if their child gets into a fight?
Right. So it's a complicated question in that, we want to be able to understand what our child's experience is in that, right? We want them to have the skills and the tools necessary to resolve the fight, resolve the disagreements, bring the points of view closer. We don't want to necessarily rush in and rescue them each and every or any time that kind of a thing happens. But, there's a line. If the fight, were to become so physical that it were to become, a serious risk for injury, for example, then some sort of intervention with the school might be necessary. But really, what we want to be doing is talking with our kids about their experiences with challenging social interactions, and really working with them to brainstorm on how to resolve these issues in a way which is effective. So really, it's about talking, helping them fill their toolbox with tools that they can actually use in a way that's useful to them. But really, the most important thing is acknowledging the experiences of our children and really trying to understand where they're coming from.
And I think it's important not to, just like you mentioned, jump in too soon if it's not necessary, and let the child figure it out themselves.
Right. It goes back to this idea of balance. We want to really strike the balance between supporting our children and also letting them sort of experience the world, experience their world fully. And experiencing their world fully really will involve resolving their own conflicts on many levels. And so it's about striking the balance. There are situations where parental involvement is necessary, if a situation were to get dangerous, or, if a child was really struggling or ended up really, depressed as a result of whatever had happened. But on the other side of that, it's really important for kids to have those skills to resolve these conflicts on their own, because they're going to need to be able to do that in the real world down the road when they're out of college, when they're, out there working. So it comes back to this idea of balance, like so much of this does.
Exactly. And the next pillar number 5, is about building motivation. Tell me more about that.
Right. So there are two types of motivation. There's extrinsic motivation and there's intrinsic motivation. And extrinsic motivation is motivation that's really driven from the outside in. So, kids are wanting to do things because of the rewards that they're going to get or the praise that they're going to get or what have you. And definitely has a place, particularly early on when kids are younger. We can use extrinsic motivation effectively to, encourage our kids to do things. But really, in terms of resilience and, sort of moving through and beyond challenge, intrinsic motivation that comes from the inside out is the thing that is the most important, because that's the kind of motivation that's going to be longstanding. It's going to be, there forever, really, if a child or adult or any of us are doing things because we truly want to do them. They're important to us for whatever reason. And that motivation is, coming from a deep place within us. That's really going to be sustainable. And that's going to help us to move through and beyond challenge, more effectively than if we were just moving forward because someone was telling us that we were doing a great job, or, we were going to get a prize or a reward, or, we were getting paid for getting good grades or what have you. Not necessarily sustainable. So that's really what we're talking about there.
Absolutely. And I can bring an example of, for example, being an entrepreneur. There are two types of entrepreneurs. One type is opportunity seekers. They run after shiny objects. And the second type of entrepreneurs is more strategic. They value their core beliefs and their core values. They are more strategic when it comes to business. They pick whatever is intrinsically motivating to themselves and whatever they are interested in, and they go with it, and they go for years. And what I've seen, those entrepreneurs, those business owners, those businesses in long run make more money, make a bigger impact, and are more fulfilling for both the entrepreneur and for the employees.
Yes, I hear what you're saying. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because the second type of entrepreneur that you're describing is really driven from that inside out place. Their true passion is what's driving them forward. Whereas the first kind of entrepreneur you described is more this extrinsically motivated, wow, that looks interesting. That looks great. The shiny object thing. And yeah, definitely can derail an entrepreneur, derail a business, in fact. So totally hear what you're saying. That's a great point.
Right. They spread themselves too thin. And I think this also comes from the childhood as well. Some element of this comes from the way they were brought up, the way their parents taught them about going about doing things.
Yes, absolutely. That can be a big piece of it for sure. And just a personality thing too, or a confidence thing as well. Not feeling really grounded in the direction that they're going, or is this really the true passion? And maybe I should try this. And it can really become quite a vicious cycle, really.
On that note, let's move on to the next pillar. Pillar number 6, you talk about finding confidence.
Absolutely. And so confidence really important when it comes to resilience, because confidence is what allows all of us to really embrace challenge and embrace challenge really as an opportunity for growth. And so this could mean trying new things. It could mean, just as we were talking about with courage, trying things that, seem scary at the outset, but we're going to do them anyway. And then when we have small successes in that thing that we're trying that seemed scary, we start to become more adept at it. We start to develop more confidence in our ability to do, it could be the batter's box. It could be playing music. It could be doing art or hitting that tennis ball. It could be so many different things. It could be reading for the child who has dyslexia and who struggled so hard to learn to read. And then all of a sudden they can read at a very rudimentary level and they start doing it more. Their confidence grows and all of a sudden they're at the same level with their peers and keeping up. And once that happens, confidence can really soar. And so we want kids to really start to internalize and understand the value of practice in building confidence. We want to help them to internalize this idea that the ability to succeed really comes through hard work and persistence. And with that hard work and persistence, we become more confident. So it's all sort of related. And, another important point is helping children to identify strengths and then to use those strengths to compensate for challenges that they might have, which then in turn builds more confidence. So you see how it's sort of all connected in terms of how we help children to develop confidence and then become more confident over time. And these principles really apply, again, to all of us across the lifespan with whatever it is we're doing.
Yes, developing confidence is definitely a cycle. So if, for example, when the kid does something and works hard at it and they get a reward out of it, that reward makes them more willing, more confident to do it again. And the more they do it, the more confidence they build. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, exactly. Yep, absolutely what I'm talking about.
The 7th pillar, you talk about creating optimism. What do you mean by optimism and why is it so important?
Optimism is so important because, at times, and particularly we've seen it in recent current events, things can become hopeless. Things can feel really hopeless around us. And the reality is that challenge is real. And because of that, it's too easy to fall into a pattern of ignoring the good that happens around us each day and focusing just on the bad or difficult things. From this perspective, it's really important to help kids to develop a sense of optimism, sort of helping them to get in touch with the things that did go well in their day, the things that are good in their lives overall, and to help them through sort of discussion and exercises to cultivate, say, a sense of gratitude. And we might do this by, having them write about or talk about what they're grateful for each and every day. We want to help them to notice places that they do have some control over the outcome of a given situation. And we want to maybe help them to write about that or note it in a way such that they don't forget. And another big piece of this sort of optimistic outlook, as we talked about before, is this idea of encouraging greater personal responsibility and ownership of behavior and actions, because it really can kind of shift the trajectory, shift the lens through which kids are looking, through which we're all looking, and help us to find the positive as opposed to just the negative.
We definitely need more people who are optimistic about their environment, about their world around them, because I believe that's going to make the world better.
Absolutely. And again, again, I'm going to come back to this concept of balance, in that, we need to strike the balance. We don't want to be overly optimistic, like there's never anything wrong or there's challenge doesn't exist, because that's not true either. Challenge is real, and we have to, have the tools in place, the ability in place to manage those challenges. But at the same time, we need to be able to see the good. We need to be able to notice the good things that are happening around us each and every day, so that we help to maintain that sense of forward motion. That sense of optimism is what helps us to move forward each day. It's what helps kids to really move towards their potential and ultimately maximize that potential. So really, really important, this idea of optimism.
Absolutely. In college, I actually worked as part of my thesis. I worked at a daycare with toddlers and with 4 years old, 5 years old, 6-year-old children. They were children of the faculty members, the professors at the university. So in addition to that, throughout my life, I've met parents, both parents. There are two types of parents. Of course, there are more types, but I'm talking about these two types. One type, these parents tend to sugarcoat things. And then the other type of the parents, they have this healthy amount of optimism, instilling this sense of gratitude in the child while not doing too much, so that the child looks weird or doesn't jive with their classmates, their peers. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. We don't want to sugarcoat. We don't want to under support. We want to sort of find that middle ground, right? And ultimately with the goal of helping children and helping all of us really to acknowledge the reality of challenge, and then to see the good as a way of helping to move forward through and beyond that challenge, such that potential can be maximized and forward motion can happen. Because it's possible to get stuck in either place, right? Because if you're too Pollyanna about it, if you're sugarcoating everything, that's not reality. And if you're too pessimistic and too focused on the negative, you're not going to go anywhere. You're going to get stuck. So really, it's about finding that balance, that middle ground.
The key word of our talk today is balance. We've mentioned the word balance many, many times during our conversation, which is very interesting.
Yes.
For a listener who might have kids or might be looking to have kids in the future, let's give them several tools for their tool belt so that they can talk with their kids, interact with their kids better, and get better results. For example, I've learned that it's important whenever you're talking to a toddler, it's important to get on their level, on their eye level, and talk to them on the same eye level. For example, get on your knee so that you're on the same level while you're talking to the kid.
Yes. So really that is sort of a physical representation of developmentally appropriate conversation, right? So really what we want to do is we want to be engaging with our kids sort of one of the biggest tools that we can kind of share is this idea of engagement and really trying to join with our children, understand their experiences, and dialogue with them about their experiences in a developmentally appropriate way. So for the younger kids, it might be more about modeling. It might be more about, setting up situations where they can observe our behavior. As a child becomes, a little bit older, a little bit more verbal, we really want to start practicing constructive conversation, helping our children to see the good in what's going on around them, while also developing the tools to manage the challenges, whether that's teaching our children mindfulness skills, or if it's helping them to develop the skills that we talked about in relation to becoming more courageous, more confident. So much that we can do, but really it comes down to engaging in a meaningful and connected way each and every day with our children.
Any specific examples? For example, taking them to the park, any specific examples?
Well, sure. It really, the key is to make it fit into your lifestyle. So I tailor all my work to what's happening with an individual family. So for some, these kind of connected conversations might happen in the car, on the way to and from dropping siblings off at activities, that kind of thing. For some, the dinner table is a great space. That's where it happens in our house. We always have dinner together each night. For some, it might be breakfast time. For some, it might be, a family walk on the weekends. The big takeaway is really making that time to connect with your children, to connect as a family, and to really have these meaningful conversations, which are going to help kids to develop the skills that we've been talking about here tonight, and to really become resilient such that they can move through and beyond the challenges that they're inevitably going to face.
So, Dr. Lund, how can our listener contact you if they have any questions?
They can contact me through my website, which is www.pugetsoundsportspsychology.com. And my email on that site is drkate@pugetsoundsportspsychology.com. So I'm very accessible in those ways.
I would like to ask you this question that I ask all of my guests. What is your definition of a thriving life?
That is a great question. So my definition of a thriving life is really having connection with those around you, connection with your family, connection with your kids in sort of a real, genuine, and human way, being in touch with your passions, doing work that you're passionate about, and then taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of that sort of thing. But it really comes down to connection and passion, and having all of those things in your life.
Beautiful. Well, Dr. Lund, thank you very much for joining us at the club. Absolute pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
And there we have it. Another amazing guest has visited our club. Make sure to subscribe to the Thriving Life Club podcast on your favorite app. Simply go to thrivinglifeclub.com/ and the name of your favorite platform. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube. You get the point. You will find the show notes, the episode freebie, and the resources mentioned during the episode by navigating your browser to thrivinglifeclub.com/ and the number of this episode. For example, for the episode 3, you would go to thrivinglifeclub.com/ 3. For the episode 7, you would go to thrivinglifeclub.com/ 7. We want to make this podcast the #1 podcast on iTunes in its category. When you feel inspired, head over to iTunes and give us a quick review to keep the podcast commercial free and get it discovered by more people like you and families like yours. Rate and review the podcast on iTunes and share it with your friends. Let's inspire more people together. And until the next episode, just remember, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can, live a thriving life.